Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And in today's edition, we're going to focus, of course, on the situation in the Gaza Strip, on the broader situation throughout our region, also Iran's continued race towards nuclear weapon proliferation. But before all that, it's always important to highlight that today we mark day 606 since October 7th of 2023, 606 days since the Islamist Hamas committed its atrocities on the communities of southern Israel, kidnapping at the time, of course, 251 individuals, murdering up to some 1,200, mostly civilians. And out of those hostages, many of whom have already thankfully returned, unfortunately, some of them, the majority, of course, were murdered during the course of the period of time. But nonetheless, right now as we speak, there are still 58 hostages remaining in Hamas captivity, up to 20 of them amongst the living, according to the various assessments of the Israeli as well as the American intelligence communities. But on that and much more, let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, unfortunately, we are without experts today from the various intelligence communities and the military and so on due to a technical issue that we had just now. But nonetheless, our viewers will have to do with you and I. And in that context, what can you update us on? First, let's focus on Gaza.
Yes, we will have to supply our own expertise. And you mentioned several figures regarding the length of the war and the number of hostages. There is another figure, the number of casualties that the Israeli Defense Forces has suffered since October the 7th and onward, because out of the 1,200 who died on that very day, about 1,000 were civilians and some 200 were uniformed personnel, police, intelligence or security services. And the number up to now of the military and security forces who perished in the war is 861. Now, yesterday, 3 infantry sergeants were killed in battle in the northern part of Gaza. The IDF is now concentrating on the central and southern parts of Gaza, Deir el-Balach, Khan Yunis, Rafah, but nevertheless, there is still activity ongoing in the northern part, Gaza City and north of there, because the IDF is methodically destroying the infrastructure, both above ground as well as underground, the tunnel network. And 3 Givati Brigade troopers riding a combat vehicle were killed in battle. And obviously it brings up again the question of how long will the war go on? What is the purpose? How does the mission serve the purpose? These are all questions which the Israeli public and obviously the families of the troops deployed to Gaza are asking themselves. One of the answers is that this is the military way of supporting the political goal of getting a deal in which Hamas will, in essence, capitulate. It will be disarmed. The leadership will probably get a get out of Gaza card. They will go on exile somewhere in the region, and the IDF will redeploy out of the lines which it occupies right now, and the war will, one way or the other, come to an end. Not the conflict. The conflict between Israel and Hamas is certain to go on for years, perhaps generations. Hamas does not recognize Israel. It, in fact, does not even recognize the Palestinian Authority, even though it won the elections to its parliament 19 years ago. So this particular round may be over It has to do with American mediation, with the political will. President Trump will be willing to invest, but up to now, the negotiations still go on, and what Hamas right now demands is that there will be proximity talks, that Israel will send a delegation, much like the American-Iranian talks. The Israeli delegation will sit somewhere, perhaps in Doha, Qatar, or in Cairo, Egypt. The Hamas delegation will be elsewhere in the same hotel or in a very approximate hotel, and the mediators will shuttle between the two. This is what they expect Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff to accept. He said that this is unacceptable, but we always know that such declarations serve as the opening gambit for the next round.
Indeed, even though I think there is, if I can build up on what you just mentioned, there is a real misunderstanding in Hamas of Israeli resolve when it comes to degrading its capabilities and ensuring that Hamas will pay for the atrocities of October 7th by losing the Gaza Strip. And that is something that will ultimately also facilitate the viability of ensuring that never again will such an attack occur out of the Gaza Strip, one of the war goals that were highlighted by Jerusalem, of course. But nonetheless, I do see right now May 27th as a day that really marks a significant shift when we're talking about the aid distribution centers that were erected, particularly in the southern Gaza Strip, in order to bring a certain reality in which Hamas cannot exploit the various aid for its own military means. And that is something that is quite successful right now.
That date, which you mentioned, May 27th, resonates because it was exactly a year earlier, May 27th, 2024, when President Biden, you do remember President Biden,
I'm not sure he remembers,
right,
but we do.
That's right. Came up with what he called the Netanyahu deal, Netanyahu's acceptance of the deal, and it has taken another year to negotiate and renegotiate.
Right.
But you are right, because there are two equations here. One is Israel vis-a-vis Hamas, and the other Hamas vis-a-vis the population. And if Hamas loses its grip on the population, there's a better chance of persuading the Hamas leadership that they had better cut a deal now before they lose everything.
Absolutely. I think, again, they are losing their capacity to exploit the aid for military means. The United Nations is outraged by the fact that it is not the one controlling the distribution, as was established basically via UNRWA and others. Of course, there is much politics behind this outrage, but nonetheless, when we really look at the essence of this in accordance with the last sentence of Article 23 of the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1977, it is quite clear that the one that is obliged to facilitate the aid, namely the State of Israel in this context, is the one to also agree upon the technical procedures of distribution. Therefore, the United Nations is in breach of international law when we're talking about the letter of the law.
Let me bring up another aspect of this problem. We always talk about human shields. Hamas is using the population to encompass their own leadership because they know that Israel will try to avoid collateral damage. And obviously they use the hostages as human shields. And in general, the 2 million Gazans are human shields. This is a well-known fact. But what is happening regarding the humanitarian aid is an additional trick by Hamas. One may call it human triggers. They are sending people, we don't know whether they are armed or not, whether they are civilians or their own troops towards the Israeli troops guarding the distribution. The Israeli troops are staying a few hundred meters, sometimes a kilometer, away from the distribution centers, so as not to get involved in it. When they sense danger, because they see figures coming towards them, they start firing in order to scare them away. Then Hamas announces that 24 people were killed in the distribution center. Now, regardless of the facts, this is what global media picks up.
Right.
So they managed to generate news hostile to Israel by the fact that they are sending people to threaten the Israeli troops, and the facts of what later ensued are not important.
It's amazing how the first casualty when war comes is usually the truth, and this quote keeps coming back again and again. But nonetheless, in this context, there were videos produced, of course, purporting to show Islamist Hamas terror operatives firing at civilians going to those aid distributions, which were verified as Hamas trying to prevent those civilians from reaching the designated areas at the get-go of this operation.
But you know, no one should be surprised, because there were many times before the war when there was, for instance, a power outage, a blackout in Gaza. Israel was sending fuel trucks through one of the checkpoints. And then Hamas started firing at the trucks because they didn't care about what happens to the population.
Right.
All they cared about was control. They wanted to show who's boss. And this is what is also happening now.
And it's, going back again to those purported videos of Hamas firing at the civilians, international media does not pick that up. So there is a double standard here that is just, some may say unexplainable, others say it's rooted in really anti-Israel fanaticism or a certain bias that just goes beyond the ethical foundation of journalism. And the contract between those various outlets and the viewers today is in breach, and it's very unfortunate.
But what is?
But before
no, but what is the outcome of this coverage? Twofold. One, probably we can't show cause and effect, but it's not only possible but probable. The incidents which we have seen, terror acts, including in the United States, against Jewish or Israeli targets. And the other is the impact, the political impact on governments, which then turn around, and international organizations, they turn around against Israel.
Such as President Emmanuel Macron, who comes out...
A favorite of yours.
A favorite of mine, who comes out and states disinformation. And he does so for political reasons. Of course, he has a very hostile...
Maybe this is why he got a slap in the face from his wife on the plane.
I don't want to go into their personal matters. I think that is a private matter
That's
that they
very,
need to deal
very
with
gallant
themselves.
of
Absolutely, and I will keep it at that. But nonetheless, it is outrageous to see somebody like this coming out and speaking, the talking points that Hamas produces are very meticulously chosen and thrown into the public sphere. And when you see a Western leader, and not him alone, there are other Western leaders who do exactly the same, who come out and parrot those talking points, I think it's outrageous and really reflects badly on their own countries. But I will take this opportunity to point out, because I had a very interesting conversation with a number of troops currently operational in the Gaza Strip, and the current situation is as such that Hamas is nowhere to be seen. They are in subterranean infrastructure, hiding away from IDF troops. From time to time, they send a small cell of 2 to 3 people out into the open, launch a certain rock or shoulder-propelled munition, be it an RPG or something else, towards IDF troops,
But Jonathan,
and seek to draw them in.
you
One second.
you should be the last to be surprised, because you always quote Mao Zedong, Sun Tzu. They always say, when the enemy is in strength, disappear, try to hit from behind during the night and all of that.
Amir, I'm
Popular
not
war.
surprised. I'm not surprised at all. I am familiar with those methods naturally from the foundation and upward, but nonetheless, for the sake of our viewers,
Sure.
I'm trying to give them a picture of what's the situation currently like, and that is where we see the terror operatives launching that RPG towards IDF troops, seeking to draw them into booby-trapped corners. In order to avoid those scenarios, the IDF is employing all kinds of methods, and of course, in many of the cases, as you mentioned, destroying a lot of the infrastructure above ground that is booby-trapped. And therefore, the ISA really is, there needs to be said a good word about
Shabak.
them. The Shabak, or Shin Bet, depends whoever wants to term them in one way or another. But the Israel Security Forces or the agency is really on top of its game when it comes to intelligence gathering, identifying those Islamist terror operatives, planting those munitions, those booby traps, and then allowing the engineering corps to do its work in really degrading Hamas's ability to take a toll. Unfortunately, as was mentioned at the beginning, it's not always successful, but 3 troops killed and a couple others also wounded in the past 24 to 48 hours is very low compared to what we were to expect in the event of the IDF not learning from various lessons during the course of those long months of fighting.
If there is any purpose to the mission, but this is for another
Right.
day.
Well, with this regard about the purpose, I do agree with you. There's an issue of messaging. The government in Jerusalem needs to explain itself a lot better on the goals of its current operational proceedings in the Gaza Strip. I do think that the fight needs to go on, so to speak. John Spencer, who is an expert on urban warfare and chairs that subject in the War Institute at West Point, has just released a brilliant article on this matter. I also posted it on my X account, and I suggest or encourage people to read his article on this, since it really gives a lot of merit to the operational necessity in the context of the war in the Gaza
But he is
Strip.
detached from the political framework of the war in Israel.
He is detached from the political framework. He is specifically speaking from an observer, an expert who is dealing with this from multiple lenses, of course, in concert with other experts from his institute or institution in this case, who are very clear-eyed about the situation from their perspective. Of course, there are more schools of thought, but we will leave it at that. Now, negotiations on Iran, where are we at?
So there is no official word yet out of Tehran. Unofficially, what the Iranians have told the media, and through the media, the world, maybe they have given another official response to the Americans, but it is yet to come out. What they are saying is that the American proposal is insufficient as regards what the Iranians will be given, not necessarily what they will have to do. Apparently, there is some formula regarding uranium enrichment. They have their rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They can...
There is no enrichment. It is temporary enrichment until a consortium is established.
Of course, whatever.
So it's zero enrichment, basically.
But it can be done in a regional consortium. A formula can be found regarding what their obligations will be. Because as we know, here we are in June, and of course, the Americans have withdrawn in 2018. The Iranians have stopped cooperating following this withdrawal a year later, 2019. But in any event, come October of this year, October the 18th, the JCPOA was to expire anyway. So it's moot. Either there will be a new agreement or there may be an armed conflict. And here we may see, we're not certain, we may see a division of labor between the United States and Israel. Good cop, bad cop. President Trump always says he doesn't want war. Of course, he will do whatever is necessary to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Israel has been broadcasting in broad daylight that it is planning and training in order to strike at the Iranian nuclear infrastructure if there is no agreement, and perhaps even if there is one, if Israeli security interests are not served. So there is this double game. The Iranians get the message, the double message, and we will see whether in the coming weeks there will be a breakthrough in the negotiations.
You know, even as a historian yourself, President Roosevelt, when World War II was unleashed upon the world, of course, he won on a ticket of isolationism. He was not looking to go out. He received the backing from anti-military mindset, going for really looking inward rather than outward. But when he realized the necessity to confront the challenges at hand, he took up the mantle and he convinced the American public, as a president should, of the urgency of the hour that they were living in, and thank God that everything ensued the way it did. President Trump is looking right now at a reality. He did one on a certain ticket of ending the everlasting wars. But when he saw that ticket, all those wars naturally, from going to the Russia-Ukraine war, going to the Iranian nuclear aspirations, and it's currently on a race. The IAEA just released a very damning report about this race. The Chinese, according to intelligence officials, are edging towards unleashing themselves upon Taiwan and other sectors around the globe. The world is on fire. And the United States, if it wants to remain the hegemon of the 21st century, even within a multipolar world of sorts, it still has the leading role, needs to take initiative, needs to understand its placing in this world, and needs to think about how to move forward.
When I look at you, there is some resemblance to another guy with a beard, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, whose views are extremely against involvement in wars. Now, there is only one final decision maker.
Absolutely, I agree with that. However, Vice President J.D. Vance changed his opinion in the last 5 years alone 20 times, roughly. So I think that he is a pragmatic enough individual, very intelligent, to look at reality and say, we need to deal with what we're facing right now for the sake of having a United States that can withstand the challenges at hand. Because if everything unfolds on their watch and they just stand idly by, there is a famous quote, you know, bad things happen when good men stand by and do nothing. Well, this is up to them to decide on.
But in 5 to 6 weeks, we are going to have this military parade in Washington, D.C., taking place on the anniversary, the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, which also happens to fall on Donald J. Trump's birthday. Do you believe that before June the 14th, there can erupt a war in the Middle East?
You know, Professor Niels Bohr, who was a very famous quantum physics scientist, you know, a Danish-born, very capable, he basically laid the groundwork for the proliferation of the first atom bomb. Before Oppenheimer, he was actually the teacher of Oppenheimer. And he made a statement about, when weapons, it's not just any other weapon. It's an entirely different world. And if Iran attains its nuclear weapon, be it in the process or edging towards it, which it is, it will not be just another weapon in an arsenal of a rogue country. It will be an entirely different world with a non-proliferation treaty at stake, if not completely
But we are
obsolete.
we are talking about the timeline, about the immediate future. We will probably have to wait for a few more days or weeks to know the answer.
We will have to wait a few more days and weeks. Nevertheless, I do want to point out that the United States and Israel are jointly preparing for every contingency, as every military should, to ensure that all options and possibilities are available to both the leader in Washington and the leader here in Jerusalem to take at the hour that they proceed. And the same goes for other actors, including Western European actors that are no less involved in this matter. With regard to the October 18th deadline, of course, it's a deadline, an expiration date rather, for the snapback of the JCPOA, all the various UN Security Council resolutions that include various sanctions. It also highlights a very important point that the snapback includes zero enrichment. And therefore, the Iranians are completely terrified of such a scenario. Mr. Amir Oren, this is all the time that we have for today. Thank you very much for all of your insights.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. And we hope to see you during our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.